Welcome to Chapter 10. In this chapter, we're going to talk about motivating employees. I think we've all had a job where we've felt very motivated to do a great job. And we probably all had a job where we haven't felt motivated. Well, being a manager and managing a group of people and motivating them is a key aspect to running a business or managing a business. So today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the theories behind what motivates employees, and then we're going to talk about how to apply those for when you're managing your own business or helping you at work. So let's dive in. The value of motivation. So let's talk about two different types of reward systems. There's intrinsic rewards, which are the personal satisfaction you feel when you perform a job well and you complete your goals. Some examples of this could be pride in your performance, a sense of achievement. Think about to-do lists. Think about making a to-do list and the satisfaction you feel when you mark through a completed project or task and you check off that box or you mark through it. You have a sense of achievement and a sense of pride. And there's also intrinsic rewards. Some people are motivated by intrinsic rewards, something given to you by somebody else as a recognition of good work. They can be pay raises, maybe just a good praise or congratulations or a nice job, and obviously promotions. So when we talk about intrinsic rewards and we talk about extrinsic rewards, it's important as a manager to recognize what motivates people. For my personal belief, intrinsic rewards, I'm often motivated by those. I take a lot of pride in what I do, and I like to feel that I've helped somebody further their education or learn a little bit more, and I take pride in that. My brother, on the other hand, is very into extrinsic rewards. He's all about what position he has and raises and promotions, and he's very motivated by that as opposed to just having a sense of achievement. It's important to remember that each individual is different, and the value of what motivates them is different as well. So let's talk about some theories. And the book goes over a couple theories. And first one we'll talk about is Frederick Taylor. Now, he's considered the father of scientific management. And in early 1900s, at the turn of the century, he came up with the theory of scientific management, the studying of workers to find out the most efficient ways of doing things and then teaching people those techniques. Around the turn of the century, this was a very important study. Now, there's three key elements to Frederick Taylor's theories: time, methods of work, and rules of work. And again, these three elements are often the key to increased productivity: improving time, improving the methods and methodology of the work, and the rules of work, and making sure that there's rules in place for workers. Now, time motion studies, these are studies of which tasks must be performed to complete a job and time needed to do each task. It's kind of interesting because in the book, it talks about Frederick Taylor and it talks about his study of coal miners and his experiments where he would give different size tools and he would literally take a stopwatch and he would try to figure out the connection between the size of the shovel and the output of the worker. So it was a very hands-on experiment, and Frederick Taylor often had his stopwatch out, and he studied it. This led to the development of the principle of motion economy. Now, this is a theory developed by Frank and Lillian Gilbert that every job can be broken down into a series of elementary motions, basically teaching somebody a series of repetitive tasks that they can do and carry out and get efficient and apply on a regular basis. And it's kind of funny. We talk about Frederick Taylor being the father of scientific management and that study of different size shovels and stopwatches. And we think of to ourselves that, well, this is 2020. This isn't 1900. This is a book theory. Not many people probably use this, but as the book discussed, UPS actually uses this to this day. In fact, my family owns a landscaping company up in Cleveland. We've talked about that in the past. And they actually use Frederick Taylor's and the father of scientific management, his theories as far as having everything timed out. In fact, the book goes over UPS. UPS drivers worked under strict rules and work requirements. They're told how to get out of their trucks, how fast to walk, how many packages to deliver a day, and how to hold their keys. In fact, my brother-in-law's company, our family landscaping company, we have things called window time. So, and every day they have a rule. They have to be out by 7 a.m. with their trucks and trailers and everything out to the job site. They are measured in drive time. GPS units go back to a centralized routing system, so we know exactly how much time they spend behind the wheel as opposed to working. And they are often graded on the amount of square footage that they landscape or treat. So they know exactly, and they're graded upon how many square foot of lawn or of landscape they actually treat. So even though Frederick Taylor his theories came about and turned into century, they're very, very applicable to today. Now, another theory, Elton Mayo and the Hawthorne studies, this was a group of Harvard researchers. And Harvard researchers started looking at the physiological factors at play when working, the conditions of when they're working. And more importantly, they looked at how workers worked under different levels of light. Um, productivity increased regardless of light condition with the theory that people were watching them. Researchers decided it was a human or physiological factor at play because they tended to act differently when they know they're being studied. And even further, they found out that when they were involved with the research project and were able to make suggestions and comments and improvements, they took more pride in their work and they actually improved their efficiency when they were a part of the research study going on. Very interesting study by the Harvard researchers that found that a more involved people are, the more efficient they become. Now, my main job is in advertising, and advertising is based off of people's wants and needs. And one of the things that we look at is motivating people to buy. Well, one of the studies that we use is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of course, can be applied to advertising like we do, but it also can be applied to motivating people. And basically, Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a pyramid, and we'll go over that here in a second. But it's a theory of motivation based on unmet human needs, from basic physiological needs to be safe, socially accepted, have high self-esteem, and high self-actualization, feel of accomplishment. So the needs that have already been met do not motivate, and if a need is filled, you go up to the next level, a higher level need emerges. So if you take a look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, everybody starts at the beginning that has physiological needs, that needs to be well fed, not hungry, water, food, breathe. If those are met, they need to feel safe at work. They need to have some sort of safety at work. If those are met, they need to feel accepted. They need to feel a part of a team. They need to feel accepted by a group of peers. Next comes esteem. They need to feel good they need to feel good about themselves. And then finally, at the very top, if all these needs are met, the feeling of accomplishing something, right? So you can see in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as we recognize these five needs, we can motivate people based on those needs as far as making them feel that they've been met. Now, a very similar theory to Maslow's hierarchy of needs is Hertzberg's motivating factors. So Hertzberg, his research centered on the question, what creates enthusiasm for workers and what makes them work harder and to their full potential? So, much like Maslow, Hertzberg found that job content factors were most important to workers. Workers like to feel that they contribute to the company and to the goals of the company. Motivators are job factors that cause employees to be productive and give them satisfaction that they're helping it. But it's interesting, unlike Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Hertzberg found that job environment factors maintain satisfaction but did not motivate employees. Uh, these hygiene factors are job factors that cause dissatisfaction if missing, but do not necessarily motivate employees if increase. So let's take a look at some motivators versus just hygiene factors. Basically, these hygiene factors are factors that can cause dissatisfaction, but meeting those needs doesn't really motivate anybody. So let's take a look at typical motivators. The work itself, right? A challenging job, a challenging work, achievement or recognition, responsibility, giving somebody responsibility, and of course, promotions or growth management. These are motivators. But Hertzberg determined that hygiene or maintenance factors, meaning, company policy and administration, being supervised, safe working conditions, interpersonal relations, coworkers, salary status, and job security, these are just maintenance factors or factors that can cause dissatisfaction, but giving somebody job security isn't going to make them work any harder. So it's kind of interesting that Hertzberg and Maslow had very similar theories, but just differ a little bit. So if you take Maslow's hierarchy of needs and stack them up from top to bottom, you'll notice that Hertzberg's theories of factors are very similar, where the bottom is mostly hygiene maintenance, and the top, as you move to the top, it's more motivational. Same with Maslow. The physiological needs of going to work and feeling, not hungry or feeling, safe at work, they're not a reason to be motivated to work harder. They're a reason to quit a job, but they're not really a motivator to go, oh, but there's donuts in the break room, I'm going to work harder. Or, I feel like I'm not going to get hurt at work today, I'm going to work harder for the company. You can kind of see how both of those theories, they kind of are based upon the same things. It's interesting, isn't it? Moving on, McGregor had a theory that there's two different types of managers, and I'm going to talk about these two different types of management styles, and I guarantee that each of you probably have an experience with a manager that is an X manager and a manager that is a Y manager. So let's take a look at it. All right, Douglas McGregor proposed that managers have two different sets of assumptions concerning workers. Their attitudes about motivating these workers were tied to these assumptions, Theory X and Theory Y. So let's talk about Theory X, these type of managers that have a Theory X assumption. They assume that workers dislike work and are always trying to seek to avoid it. Workers must be forced, controlled, directed, or threatened with punishment to get them to perform. Workers prefer to be directed and to avoid all responsibility. And the primary motivators for employees are fear and punishment. Now, I think we have all had heard of a manager, or possibly even had a manager that had that theory X management style. That's not very good, is it? Right? I think that we can all agree that managers with this type of a theory aren't good managers. So let's take a look at theory Y. Now, unlike theory X, managers that have a theory Y assumption about employees, people like work. It's part of life, right? People want to go to work. They want to contribute. They want to seek goals to which they're committed. They want to do a good job. Commitment of goals also depends on perceived rewards, right? So you have to have an open communication, and you have to have established goals. And those goals have to be either intrinsic or extrinsic value, and it has to motivate the right person. Most people will seek responsibility. People can use creativity to solve problems and be open and free thinking. Intellectual capacity is only partially realized, and people are motivated by a variety of rewards. So, in theory Y management, an open culture or a very open communication is encouraged, and theory Y is very different than theory X when it comes to McGregor. So another theory that comes into play here that's very is William Ochi. Now, William Ochi looked at a couple different cultures. Now, William Ochi looked at cultural differences between the United States workers and workers in Japan, and he called this type A, and workers in Japan type J. Now, type J type of workers are very committed to the organization and the group. They're very family oriented. They treat their workplace like a family. Whereas type A workers, Ochi researched and found that type A workers are very focused on the individual goals as opposed to the company goals or the family goals. Now, his theory was that there's a middle ground, right? Or a hybrid approach, and he called this theory Z. Now, if we take a look at that, it's a blend between the type A type of management approach and then the type J type of management approach, whereas we can still provide some of the basic needs like long-term employment without giving, the feeling of lifetime employment. We can provide individual decision-making and consensual decision-making and have a collective decision-making process. We can have individual responsibility and collective responsibility. We can slow evaluation and promotion. We can have implicit informal control with explicit formalized control too. So it's the best of both worlds. We can moderately specialized career paths and holistic concern for employees, including family. So if we take a look at the comparison between the three, in theory X, employees dislike work and try to avoid it, whereas in theory Y, employees view work as a natural part of life. In theory Z, this type Z that was theorized by Auchi, employee involvement is the key to increased productivity. Again, in theory X, employees prefer to be controlled and directed. Again, in theory Y, employees prefer limited control and direction. In this new hybrid approach of theory Z, employee control is implied and also informal. Theory X, employees seek security, not responsibility. In theory Y, employees will seek responsibility under proper work conditions. And in this hybrid, they want to share responsibility and decision-making with management. Theory X, employees must be intimidated by managers to perform, whereas in theory Y, employees perform better in work environments that are non-intimidating. In theory Z, this hybrid approach, employees perform better in environments that foster trust and cooperation between employees and management. And finally, in theory X, employees are motivated by financial rewards, whereas theory Y, employees are motivated by different needs. Theory Z is that hybrid of employees need both guaranteed employment and will accept slow evaluations and promotions and not want to rush to the top. So, another theory, goal setting theory and management by objectives. In a goal setting theory, the idea that setting ambitious but attainable goals can motivate workers and improve performance if the goals are accepted, accompanied by feedback, and facilitated by organizational conditions. A lot of times in organizations, goal setting theories are put into play. A lot of times you'll sit down with your manager and have a year-end review and set goals for the next year. These are supposed to be ambitious but obtainable goals that can motivate you to try to hit those goals and have some sort of intrinsic or extrinsic reward. In addition, you're given feedback and you're given support by the organization, and that's what that means, organizational conditions. So think about your job at work. Maybe you work part-time at a store, maybe you work full-time, but do you have a goal-setting organization? Do you sit down and set goals? I remember my first job out of college was at John Deere and Company. And every year I would sit down with my boss and I would set goal setting theories, both for hitting sales goals or performance goals to help company achieve the goals, but also goals for me to grow as an individual to become a more valuable employee. One of those goals was to go back to school and get my master's. So you can see how both goal setting can help both the company as well as the individual better themselves, which ends up helping the company in the long run. Now, applying goal setting theories, management by objectives, this is the process. It involves a cycle of discussion, review, and evaluation of objectives among top and middle level managers, supervisors, and employees. It's kind of a consensus goal setting organization. Managers formulate goals in cooperation with everybody in the organization, right? Not just an employee and a manager, but an employee, supervisors, managers, and top all help set goals. Now, there needs to be a monitoring of results and rewards once those goals are achieved. A lot of government organizations use this method. In fact, the DoD uses this method, and it's a organization-wide process. And a lot of times when you use MBO, you have to be a slow changing organization. That's why government organizations use it so much, because it doesn't change. Governments creep along, and government organizations don't change very rapidly. So if you're going to use this, you got to make sure that the long-term goals reflect how fast or how quickly the organization pivots. Now, meeting employee expectations, the expectancy theory. So expecting, it's the amount of effort employees exert on a specific task, and it depends on their expectations of the outcome. So basically, what's in it for me? What are employees expecting? Employees ask themselves, can I accomplish this task? What's in it for me? What's going to be my reward? And is the reward worth the effort? Now, it's important to mention that expectations can vary from person to person. So the expectancy theory can be different for everybody. That's what makes it so hard to apply, because it can be very, very different. So somebody may ask themselves, "Can I accomplish this task?" Well, two different people that are given the same task may have a different opinion. So you can see in this flow chart how the expectancy theory works. Can I accomplish this task? No, I'm not motivated. If it's yes, okay, is it worth it? Is the reward of me doing this going to be worth it? No, not motivated. Yes, okay, I'm motivated, right? Now, researchers, when they talked about this, they determined 5 steps for managers to help manage this. They need to determine what rewards employees value. Okay, we need to figure out what rewards do our employees value. Is it money? Is it extrinsic? Is it intrinsic? Right? Now we have to determine each employee's performance standard. We have to have some sort of benchmark, right? Because if we're going to set goals and we're going to ask somebody to accomplish a task, is it really above their skill set? We got to make sure that performance standards are attainable, because if they're not obtainable, nobody's going to get past that first step. We're also going to have to tie reward to performance. We're going to have to think of a reward system that ties it directly to the performance at hand. And we need to make sure that those rewards are adequate, and employees feel that those rewards are adequate. Now, in addition to treating employees fairly, and from managers to employees, there's also a feeling of equity among coworkers. And the equity theory is the idea that employees try to maintain equity between inputs and outputs compared to other people in similar positions. So, not only as managers are we worried about our relationship with our employees, but we're worried about their relationships with other employees, and then making the connection between, okay, and what I'm doing, the output, is my work output equal to somebody else in the same position? And if it's not, if I'm working harder than somebody else, why am I not getting what they are getting? And a lot of times it's what they perceive the other person is getting. So it's important for us to not only maintain our relationship between worker and employees, but I think all of us have felt at some point in our job history, whether it's part-time or full-time, that somebody was getting more than what we got, right? And again, it's just human nature to feel that way. But a good supervisor helps manage those expectations and helps manage the equity. And how do we do that as managers? Well, one way I do this as managers is I'm very open with people, especially those underneath me, that when they do something and and they are recognized and they receive a reward for it, I'm very open with it, and I share that news with other employees. I don't like other employees assuming that they got a raise without knowing exactly what they're being commended for. So I often talk to my employees and say, "Employee X, congratulations, you went above and beyond. You did this, this, and this. We're so happy with your performance." And a lot of times that happens when it comes time for the other employee comes up to me and says, "Well, I know so and so is making much more than me. I don't understand why they're getting praised and rewarded and I'm not." I'm able at that point to say, "Well, we talked about this when I publicly talked to them. They did this, this, and this to garner that." Right? Because perceived inequities can lead to lower productivity, reduced quality, increased absenteeism, and even resignation or somebody quitting. So it's very important, again, not to only manage the relationship between you and your employee, but also between and understand what's going on between employees. All right. So we talked about all these theories, and all these theories are great in mind, all right? But we have to talk about putting these theories into action. So great, we talked about all these theories. How do we put these theories into action when we manage people, right? Some of the ways that we can motivate people is one through job enrichment, right? And job enrichment is a motivational strategy that emphasizes motivating the worker through the job itself. It's based on Hertzberg's motivators, such as responsibility, achievement, and recognition. Remember Hertzberg and Maslow, and they're very similar motivators, right? So there's five key characteristics of work that are important. Their skill variety, providing a bunch, making sure that people are challenged and skills are being used. Task identity is being performed. Task significance, autonomy or the freedom to make choices, and then feedback on their performance. Now, it, it these five characteristics are very important, but they can also cause a little bit of issues as far as job enrichment is concerned, especially with the first two when we talk about skill variety and task identity. Being making sure that somebody has opportunities to use different skills can seem great from the outside, but you're going to have to prepare and train them in various different methods to make sure that the job is done towards companies' needs. Task identity, making sure that they understand the tasks that are laid out for them, and the significance of those tasks are also very important, but they also can lead to some dissatisfaction as far as, okay, this is all I'm ever going to be. So when we talk about that, and job enrichment, there's a couple other items. Job enlargement, for one, and this is a strategy that involves combining a series of tasks into one challenging and interesting assignment. And job rotation, a job enrichment strategy that involves moving employees from one job to another. So we're talking about tasks and identity and significance. Well, in your book, Job Enlargement, talks about Whirlpool, how they enlarged the job series, a task series, by instead of people making installing one part for a Whirlpool machine, they, in fact, were responsible for putting together a series of parts and making it more interesting for the assembly line workers. And job rotation is a strategy where you move employees from station to station, from job to job, to keep them more engaged, to keep things fresh and interesting for them. But with both job enlargement and job rotation, you think that it's a good idea from the outside looking in, and it may very well be, but you have to understand that there may be some drawbacks to it, as there's more training that needs to be involved. And again, you have to make more rules and more more management decisions as far as when to what do we combine, how do we rotate, and there's a lot more that goes into it. Now, communication is very important, and it's a very important strategy as far as when we're trying to motivate employees. We need to create a culture that rewards listenings, both the employees as well as management. We can't expect our employees to listen if we're not willing to listen ourselves. So we need to train managers to listen. And we need to use effective questioning techniques, a lot of open-ended questions, to really understand our employees and their needs, right? And what motivates them. We need to remove barriers and open communication, and avoid vague and ambiguous communication between the levels. We need to make it easy to communicate. We need to make it easier for the assembly line worker or the bottom line employee to talk all the way up through management, whether it's directly or through a series of connections. They have to feel that they're heard. And we need to ask employees on a regular basis what's important to them. We also need to recognize when they do a job and do it well. Raises are not the only way to recognize an employee's performance. Recognition can also include advancement, challenging work, noticing actions, paid time off, parking spots, vacation days, schedules, changes, and small equity, stake, or stock options. Because remember, at the beginning of this presentation, we talked about intrinsic and extrinsic motivating factors. Some people are motivated by one more than the other. Some people are motivated by both. And it's our job as managers to recognize that and to recognize those motivators. Now, it's also interesting when we're trying to motivate employees across the globe or internationally. We have to understand what the cultural differences are that make worker motivation a challenge. We need to understand cultural differences. For instance, there's countries out there, there's cultures out there that are high context cultures, and they require relationships and group trust before performance, right? These are cultures like Japan. If we're dealing with employees in Japan or Saudi Arabia, they're very high contact cultures that require relationships and group trust. Whereas America has a very low context culture. We believe relationship building distracts us from accomplishing tasks. And so we don't build a lot of uh, groups and relationships. We believe that sometimes get in the way. So understanding the culture that we're dealing with can help us motivate employees as well. In addition, understanding the generation that our employee is from can help us understand motivating. Because as we come from different generations, we've experienced very different histories. And what I mean by that, let's take a look at some of the different generations. I'm sure you're familiar with some of these terms, but we'll talk about each generation and some of the experiences that they've experienced. My parents, for one, are part of the baby boomers. And baby boomers got their name because after World War II, the soldiers came over and came back home and started their family. They experienced a great economic prosperity, job security, and optimism about their future because they just won a war and the economy got back on track. And it was a time of great economic prosperity. Then Generation X came along, and that's my generation. We were raised in a dual career family, attended daycare, and have a feeling of insecurity about jobs. And Generation X people felt a lot of my friends' parents, I grew up in a single working household. My dad had a job, my mom was a house mom. It was taboo before Generation X that a woman left the house and her family to go have a job. And Generation X, you started to see that happening. And about half of my friends, their mom worked. Half of my friends, their mom stayed home. So you saw more dual career families, and you had more kids attending daycare, and you had a more insecure feeling about your job. In Generation X, we got away from, going to work for a place for 30 years and then retiring. That just didn't happen anymore. That wasn't happening anymore. We went through the 80s with job losses in the economy. Generation Y, otherwise known as millennials, born between 80 and 95, these individuals, majority of you probably are, you were raised by parents and don't remember a time without the internet and mobile cell phones. Your main constant in life is inconsistency. I actually feel bad for millennials right now. You've lived through two very tough times. You've lived through 9/11, the war in Iraq, and then now you're living through COVID in your college careers, and that's terrible. You don't remember a time without a computer. I do. I remember using a typewriter to write high school papers. I took typing class in high school, people. I mean, We didn't have computers. We didn't have computers till I went to college. It's crazy. You guys, a lot of you guys have had cell phones all your life. I didn't have a cell phone until I got graduated college. So it's a very different time, and the way we talk about to these generations is very different. These generations are motivated very differently. Generation Z grew up post 9/11 in the wake of the Great Recession and amid many reports of school violence. Main constant in life is inconsistency. And Generation Alpha, those of you born after 2010, are going to experience something different. And it's very important to understand when you're motivating employees and you're talking to employees that you understand what motivates a baby boomer is completely different than what motivates a millennial. And it's important that we keep those things in mind. Generation X in the workplace. They have a desire to economic security, but focus more on career security than job security. The good motivators as managers due to emphasis on results rather than work hours. They tend to be flexible and good at collaboration and consistent building, and they're very effective at giving employee feedback and praise. Millennials in the workplace. Again, these are all assumptions, but they tend to be more impatient, skeptical, blunt, and expressive. They're very tech savvy, and they're able to grasp new concepts very quickly. In fact, I teach social media for business, social media business class. I don't have to teach students, especially millennials, how to use social media. I just need to teach them how to apply social media to business concepts. Whereas I teach older people how to use social media for business, I have to start at the basics and teach them about social media and the theories and how to use technology. Is very different. Millennials are very tolerant. They place high value on work-life balance. They want a good work-life balance. They don't want to be stuck behind their desk until 10 o'clock at night. Fun and stimulation are key job requirements and tend to job surf due to the state of the economy. Generation Z, they tend to be cautious and very security-minded. They are inspired to improve the world. They're resilient and pragmatic. They're tech savvy. They want to be a part of a community within a workspace. And they place emphasis on practical benefits such as healthcare. So when we talk about communicating across a generation, these are some general observation that baby boomers prefer meetings and conference calls. Gen Xers prefer email and will choose meetings only if there are no other options. And millennials prefer to use technology to communicate, particularly through social media, while Gen Zers prefer face-to-face meetings and shy away from phone calls. It's kind of interesting how communication across the generations have changed. So that's it for Chapter 10, Motivating Employees.